Denne videre i det jurar just står, älgar yllar, älgyrar uri, älgar rustimare jurar står, jämgere i, älgyrar uro.
Hello my dear friends, my name is Untitled, and today I'm going to talk about the parts of the self in the Norse spiritual understanding. When speaking about Norse spirituality, it's inevitable talking about certain concepts belonging to the spiritual reality of each individual and how they influence our very existence and our relation with the natural world, the gods and the cosmos. And so far, in many videos, I have often mentioned certain terms such as Philia, Hamre, Hugr, Hemingia, etc. But I usually give you a superficial understanding of what those are to avoid creating a second subject within a video whose main purpose is not to explain any of these concepts. So today, I have decided to create a video solely to develop each concept belonging to the parts of the self. And this video shall serve as your notebook to consult whenever you need to remember these concepts. Now, this subject is extremely complex to put in one single video, but I've tried my best. But even so, I'll advise you to take out your actual notebooks to write this down. I'm going to talk about like, hond, hugr, mini, Philia, vard, hamr, höd, hemingia, and finally main. So with no more delay, let's get started, my dear friends. Unlike the religious realities we are so familiar with, in terms of the concept of the soul, the Nordic spirituality does not include a simplified separation between body and soul. For instance, Christianity is clear on this subject. The soul lives within the body, but upon death there is a clear detachment from the physical self. The body is one thing and the soul is another, which sooner or later travels into some unreachable place and disconnects itself from our reality. A clear separation from the body, mind and soul. Quite simple. But to the Norse, the self was a more complicated entity. It wasn't a single entity, there wasn't a clear union. Instead, there is a sort of compression of different parts that made the self, and those parts coexist and can detach themselves from one another in certain circumstances. And some of these parts have a conscience of their own. In the Norse description of the human being, there are many aspects of the soul, and these aspects compose the individual, both the physical and the psychological. And if we take a look at how humans came to be in the Norse myths, we have a clear perception of the parts of the self. Humans were not created by the gods. Humans already existed in the form of two trees, Ask and Hemla, Hash and Helm. These two logs were found on a shore by Hudan, Hunnar and Lodur. Humans had been cast out from the primordial sea, but they did not have the form and capacities of today. We had our own existence, but then the gods gifted us with something that would make us whole. Humans had no hug, no blood and no godlikeness. So Hudan and Hunnar gave them spirit and hug, and Lodur gave them godlikeness, character and behavior. Hudan gave them breath, Hunnar gave them understanding and movement. Lodur gave them senses and emotions. So humans only existed in a physical level, as logs, as trees, nothing more than a physical existence. Huden gave them the spiritual level, life and breath. Hunar gave them the mental level, understanding and movement. Lodur gave them everything else that gives humans the capacity to travel between realities, senses and emotions. None of these levels correspond to the concept of a soul in the traditional Christian sense, a unique and non-transferable essence of a person. But to the Norse, there was no concept of the soul before Christianity. So they had various concepts that together formed the individual, which means the self was able to experience different realities during life and after death, experiencing different levels of existence and different spiritual levels. Let's take a look at the detailed arrangement of the different aspects of a person, the different parts that comprise the human self. Lik, the physical body, its matter itself, the physical self in its raw state, just like Ask and Hambla before the gods gave them the levels of existence. Lik is the structure of the body, the foundations that hold the physical self, the skeleton and framework of the other aspects. The physical body was called lik, which was also often the term to refer to a dead body, the physical self without the other aspects that make a person, just the whole, the very thing that gives us the ability to live and manifest ourselves in this world, in Midgard. Hånd, the spirit, the breath. The breath is the closest thing connected to the spiritual self in the Norse perspective. We have been given life through the breathing of nature, the wind itself. Huden used to be known as being a god of the wind as well, of the weather. The Norse often said that one's breath is one's spirit. Hånd is the essence of life. It is what awakens life in the physical existence, the spark of life. All life has this Hånd in its core. Nature itself has Hånd, and the stronger it is, the more powerful a place can be. Everything from rock to tree, from animal to human, can have a higher amount of Hånd, and therefore be more powerful. This is the divine spark, and it's the very thing that connects us to every reality, be that spiritual or our own reality. The Hånd flows up and down like a force which connects us to everything. It's this very Hånd that is the key to open up the power of the voice in Galdr. Galdr isn't about the incantations or the words spoken, but how you let them out, the sound, the vibration of the voice, letting out your own spirit and giving part of yourself, giving your breath to create life. It is to give existence to something. It's your own essence that comes forth, and the vibration of the voice travels and spreads. I cannot help to think that this exact concept may have something to do with the Odvegislor. As you can see, the name itself starts with Hånd. These are the high seat pillars which in pagan Scandinavia played a particular religious role. These were the pillars of the high seat on the north side of the house, which most certainly have a link to the cult of the ancestors and the cult of the world pillar, represented by the pillars supporting the house roof. The Icelandic sagas tells us that settlers threw their Hóndvegislur, their high seat pillars, into the sea in sight of land and then settled wherever these pillars were washed ashore. Such pillars also came from temples, which in certain sagas have the images of the gods carved on them. The same principle of the myth of Husk and Hembla, being tree logs in a shore. So Hond, in this particular tradition and cult, seems to be precisely that which sustains life, because the physical is nothing without its spiritual foundations. Then we have the Hugr. Huggen or Hugre is the thought, the mind and conscious qualities of the soul. It corresponds to someone's personality and the conscious cognitive process. Hugr and Mini, thought and memory, personified in the figures of Huden's two ravens, Hugin and Munin. The Hugr is the analytical thinking, and it represents the functions of the side of the brain that holds our thoughts. The Hugr is free and flows easily, which gives us the ability to have journeys of the mind and of the intellect. The Hugr belongs to us and it's in us, but those who have an exceptionally strong Hugr sometimes can affect someone else just by thinking about them, expressing a spiritual connotation, connection we have with someone through the physical. Mini. Mini is very important, a very important aspect of the soul. Mini is the memory, but it's not just an idea that slowly fades away with time. It goes much deeper than that. It represents the ability to travel to the memories of the past, of ancient days. The well of Mimir or Mimir represents this concept, and it's in this well that Huden sacrifices an eye to obtain ancient wisdom, the wisdom of the past and the wisdom of those who are gone. A magical memory which contains the information of the past. It doesn't fade away because it remains in the self like something carved on the very soul. Not only is our own memories, but the memories of the ancestors which flow in us, and we are able to reach such memories. Which is a pretty interesting concept given the latest DNA researches that have been going on. The memory of our ancestors stays in our DNA, which helps us to survive. Past traumas or the very skills and abilities of our ancestors that remain in our bloodline and give us abilities that come natural to us because our ancestors already had those same abilities. For instance, knowing how to draw and paint, playing a certain instrument without having been taught in how to do it. Because a certain ancestor did it, and that memory is printed in our DNA, stored in our DNA, and then it expresses itself in our brain, in the parts that hold memory. And it's able to recreate that memory through our physical self. Mini is the ancestral wisdom. Mini is the associative thinking that represents the functions of the other half of the brain, the opposite side of Hugre, but both complement themselves. Then we have the Philia, or the plural form Philiu. This is a sort of guardian spirit or guide. The Philia usually appears in three distinct forms: as an animal, as a person of the opposite sex, and as an abstract form. Each individual has a Philia, but so do families and tribes. This is closely connected to totem animals and a totemic view of the spiritual self. The Philia is generally perceived in an animal form. It's an attendant spirit whose well-being is intimately tied to that of its owner. The Philia dies and so does its owner, although if the person dies first, the Philia, having its own conscious existence, can remain existing on its own or can pass on to the descendant of the family of the previous owner, thus continue to guide and help individuals. The character of the Philia and also its form are closely connected to the character of its owner. The Fylgjur are what would later be called the companions of witches, familiar spirits. So it takes the form of the character of the person, a sort of doppelganger of the person which can act or appear on behalf of the person. But we also have Fylgjur belonging to a certain group. For instance, a warrior group can adopt a wolf or a bear as their Philia, and then the members of the group adopt this Philia as their animal totem. And being in contact with this Philia, a person ends up adopting the traits and personality of the Philia in question. In this case, it's not the Philia that represents the person, but it's the person that adopts the character of that Philia, which ends up having the opposite effect. Instead of the Philia having the shape of the person starts to have the shape of the Philia, which is understood as shape-shifting. Adopting the physical appearance and personality of the animal totem and acting as such. The Philia follows a person through life. It watches over the birth of the person and guides the person in dreams and then guides the person through life until death. The Philia is usually perceived as a follower, but most often it's depicted as traveling ahead of its owner, arriving at a certain destination before its owner, or appearing in the dreams of someone who will meet the owner of the Philia in the following day. And this can be better perceived in Seidr. The practitioner of Seidr makes sure to have a good relation with her Philia and learn how to communicate with it. Since this Philia is part of the person, the doppelganger of the person, as I have said, it can manifest itself on behalf of the person. So the practitioner of Seidr can send forth its mind and give it shape to physically do things or influence events. This manifestation of the mind comes in the form of an animal, because this is the Philia. The Philia is the physical and spiritual manifestation of the mind itself, which is reflected on spiritual journeys when the person shapeshifts into his or her animal spirit to travel in the spiritual world. So, the Philia is the closest thing to an understanding of the soul in the sense of a spiritual doppelganger of the person, our own physical appearance reflected on our spiritual form. Although the Philia are definitely different from the Christian concept of the soul in that they leave the person at his death and become independent beings. On the other hand, the Philia can transfer to family relations so that a certain relationship of the Fylgjur to the family of the previous owner remains and endures. The Philia is also associated with the personified luck of a person, which is the Hemingia, that I will talk about further ahead. Speaking of the Philia, we have the Vord, or Vordr, or even Vordr, which can be understood as a warden or a watcher, which is a spirit that follows a person from birth to death. Much like the Philia, the Vord can manifest itself in the shape of a person. The Hamre, which is the physical appearance, which I will talk about next. When a person dies, its Vord can still manifest itself in the actual physical body as a Draugr. The Draugr are seen like Nordic zombies, which is wrong, but perfectly understandable for lack of a better understanding of the spiritual self in the Norse spirituality. The Vord is connected to both the Hugr, memory, hamr, the physical appearance, and acts like a Philia. So therefore it can inhabit the body of a person and manifest itself after the person is dead. The draugr is exactly that, a conscious undead which contains memory and essence of its previous owner. And because the Vard inhabits the dead body, a necromancer, for instance, can control this Vard, this spiritual entity, and use the draugr. This was one of the ways to acquire knowledge from the dead, waking up the dead, because the body wasn't seen as something apart from the spiritual. The body still contained memory, essence, and a dead person could be called upon to inhabit its body once again and share knowledge. This is perfectly reflected on the Voluspa, when Huden wakes up a dead Cirrus, a prophetess, and she tells him that what he wants and what he doesn't want to know. However, certain people during their lifetime could send away their Vard on journeys to other worlds. For everyone, the Vard is disconnected from the body when the physical body dies. The Vard is the same as the ghost or wraith, a spectrum. So, I'm sure it already crossed your mind the term Vardlokur, the name of a magical song, Galdr, which was sung at prophetic sessions by Scandinavian seeresses. And in these shamanic practices, probably had a function of calling up the spirits from whom the seeresses received their knowledge. This type of Galdr was used in Seder, and the knowledge was given to the seeresses by the spirits, either from the Vard of others or the Vard of the seer herself. Now let's move on to the hamr, our shape, our appearance. The hamr is one's form or appearance. There is a clear difference between the lik, body, and the hamr, which is the appearance of that body. The hamr is that which others perceive through their physical senses. But it's important to take notice that unlike we nowadays perceive the appearance of another as something static and unaltered, to the Norse, the hamr is directly associated with shape-shifting. Our appearance is controlled by our hamr, which is also called hamn or ham. The hamr controls the other shape of all living things. This is the principle of giving form. Certain people were able to use their hugr, their mind and thought, to change the hamr, changing the appearance and form. This can be better understood during trance work. During ecstatic trance or deep sleep, a person releases its mind or soul and leaves the body, and the body stays there with its own appearance. The person takes the form of something else, usually an animal, usually its own Philia. So this process is changing the hamr, or in other words, shapeshifting. This is the exact same thing I've spoken earlier, a practitioner of Seder sending forth its mind in the form of an animal. It's the use of hugr to change the hamr and send out the Philia. So as you can see, this entire process in Seder, one must be aware of the parts of the self to be able to understand them and therefore control them. According to the myths and folklore, if the animal, the Philia, is hurt, the practitioner of Seder is also hurt. I've spoken this in the videos about Seder. It can occur one person being able to encounter a practitioner of Seder in another hamr. And this person becomes sleepy and might indeed fall asleep, which indicates that the person is entering the same world perception of that of the practitioner of Seder. You cannot change in this reality. in this existence, but you can change the Hamr in other levels of existence where other people might also be encountered. So this is exactly what's like to be aware of the different parts of the self. It's being aware of different levels of existence, different realities tied to our own. And in order to move in other realities, you must change your form. Think about it as going into space. You need a special suit to go into space. And in this world, you need this physical body to wander about, as you need other forms to wander about other realities. This sounds completely mental, I know, but it's part of the Norse spirituality, and most of us are limited to this reality only because we are too afraid to step forward into the unknown, because the unknown is scary and fear causes limitations to the mind. But once you step forward, your mind is free. Anyway, in the Norse myths, we have a couple of gods who are the masters in the change of Hamr, like Huden, Frøya, and Loki. Those who had the ability to change shape were Hamr. In the Norse society, there were men who took on battle frenzy, and they were called berserkir or húþedin. They were men who wore bear pelts or wolf skins to acquire the power of these fearsome wild animals. The belief was that these men could actually transform themselves into real bears and wolves, apparently an uncontrollable technique. But this sort of shape-shifting is the remnants of a shamanic past in the Norse culture and the use of changing the Hamr. Hold. The word hold means ecstasy or ecstatically raving, and gave rise to the name of Huden. Huden was simply called Hold, who in this alter ego aspect of himself was a lover of Frøya. Hold is the power of divine inspiration, the ecstasy that causes the mind to transcend outside the physical. Odrorir, what causes ecstasy, is the name of the divine mead that symbolically induces the divine ecstasy, the mead of the skulls. Odrorir is also the cauldron, or in some accounts the chalice where the mead is kept. So Odrorir is that which induced ecstasy, the intoxicating drink, while Hold itself is the expanded consciousness in which one experiences the deeper meaning of the world. Hold is the very force that makes it possible to travel between the worlds. Which leads me to speak about the Hemingya, the total amount of power and illumination a person is in possession of. Hemingya is the personification of good fortune of a person, not in an abstract sense, but as a kind of soul-like protective entity, and this is closely associated with the Philia. Although there is another meaning to Hemingya, which is connected to the changing of the Hamr, changing of appearance of people who are able to change their shape. The word in this case probably comes from Han Kengya, referring to people who could let their Hamr be altered. But this Hemingya can be transferred to another person after death. It denotes both happiness and luck, which was inherent in the person and his/her lineage, part of the person's personality, similar to strength, intelligence, skill, abilities, that which can be used to influence wealth, power, success to the individual and the family. This is a sort of identity of the individual, personal entity. And when a person dies, his or her Hemingya can reincarnate in one of his or her descendants. This is why it was tradition to give a child the name of the original owner of the Hemingia, to call upon the ancestor to aid the child and pass on the Hemingia, or to influence the Hemingia of the child. But it wasn't just upon death that the Hemingia could be released or pass on. It could also be lent to others during life to assist them in particular events when luck was needed. The Hemingia can be seen as a supernatural power that some people can achieve. With such a power, one can change the Hamr, and by doing so, being connected to his or her Philia, which in turn will make a person more knowledgeable, more resilient, more powerful. The Hemingia is empowered when the other aspects of the soul are awakened, the other parts of the self, when you are conscious of their existence and can create a balance between all the aspects. Don't get the Hemingia the wrong way, as being the sort of luck that takes away one's accomplishments or something that limits us to a sealed fate. Luck has nothing to do with that. Our abilities are our own, our skills, our power and knowledge, all acquired not through luck, but through hard work. Luck is just a power that influences circumstances, and we take advantage of those same circumstances and act accordingly if we are smart and put to practice our own wisdom. Everyone has the great potential to become powerful. The mind has secret knowledge locked and safe deep inside the self, but it's sealed inside our minds. When we find the key to open up such abilities, power becomes limitless, and that's exactly why it's safe and sealed within our minds. Otherwise, everyone would be able to cause great destruction once again. It's through hard work that we open up the ancestral power hidden in our minds, and the key to that power is through awareness of the different parts of the self. I would like to finish this video with one last concept that I shall probably make a video of solely about it, the Main, or also known as Megin. Megin is power and magic, or magical power. Men have Megin and gods have Hos Megin, divine power. Everything has Megin. It wasn't uncommon for Norse pagans to trust solely in their own might and strength, trusting in themselves and not in the gods and other supernatural forces. Yes, our Norse ancestors believed in the gods, but many believed in their own power. It's not a form of atheism among the ancient heathens. It's just the belief in their own power, which was exactly what they gave to the gods, and the gods gave them back. I'll focus on this concept later on another video, but suffice to say for now that the Main, or Megin, was the reason why people gave offerings to the gods. People were not giving the objects as a gift, but their own essence contained within the objects. We can have a better perception of this during the Bronze Age, when people gift the gods with broken objects. Breaking the object was precisely to release the Megin in it, to give it to the gods, giving our own essence to the gods, our power, our spiritual might. The gods in turn gave their Hos Megin, their divine power, which we could use to empower us to do all the things we need to do to survive, to achieve our goals, to have more power, to influence luck, success, wealth, etc. All it takes is the enthusiasm to give us that push to do everything. That enthusiasm is the power given by the gods in exchange of our own power, our Megin. And I'm quite sure you have seen hundreds of times rock engravings of anthropomorphic figures with hands towards the sky, or a great emphasis of the hands as if they had been stung by a bee and are swollen to the point of looking as if they are going to burst. This was the way to transfer the Pagan, our essence, to the gods, and the gods gave some of their own essence to us. Communication through the hands, through the palms, receiving the divine power. And this is why even nowadays many religions retain this position, with hands towards the sky to receive the power of the divine. But this shall be a concept for another video. Alright, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I'm sorry if I went a little bit slower than usual on this video, but I really wanted you to understand all these concepts, because I know it's complex, so I thought if I take it slowly, you would better understand all these concepts and the different parts of the soul. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and see you on the next video. And of course, as always, pa por aí.